Today we're going to be learning Eruvin Daf Samach Vav. This is the Daf for Shabbat, for Shmini Atzeret. We're going to start with, we'll read you the Mishnah from the very beginning of the chapter. Hadar ima'akum b'chatzer o mi she'eino modeh be'eruv. If you're living with a non-Jew or someone who doesn't believe in Eruv, harei ze oser alav. Okay, you're forbidden now to carry because of that person. Just like if there were a Jew in the courtyard, you wouldn't be able to carry if they weren't part of an Eruv with you. Here, they can't be part of the Eruv with you, and they forbid you from carrying. Now we're going to see what Eliezer ben Yaakov says. There have to be two people, and then they each forbid each other. But according to Tanakama, which we're going to see is Rabbi Meir, even one. Okay, we're going to skip the second part of the Mishnah about the Tzduki right now, because the main topic today is going to be this non-Jewish person living in a courtyard with a Jew and what the issues are. So Yativ Abaye bar Avin, I'm now starting at the top of Samach Bet. V'Rav Chinina bar Avin, so the two of them, brothers, it seems, were sitting. V'Yativ Abaye Gabaye, when Abaye was with them. V'Yativ V'Kamre, and they said the following. Bishlama Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir is the Tanakama's opinion. We understand Rabbi Meir, Kasavar, Dira Tovei Kochavim, Shma Dira. He must hold that any non-Jew living in a courtyard with a Jew, it doesn't matter how many Jews, is going to be a problem because we call it a place of living, and therefore it forbids just like anybody else's place of living. And therefore it doesn't matter if it's one, if it's two, it doesn't matter how many Jews are in the courtyard. Ela, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, my kasavar, but what's the logic for Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? If we view it as a house of dwelling, then afilu chad nami nitzar, then even if there's one Jew living there, it should be forbidden. And if we don't view it as a place of living, then two living there shouldn't be a problem. In other words, if we don't view it as a house of dwelling, like for example, and we're going to get to this later, let's say you have a pen of animals, okay, a stable, something like that. That doesn't, if that's in my courtyard, that doesn't forbid me from carrying if they're not part of it, because that's not considered a place of dwelling. So therefore, this also shouldn't be a problem. So if that's the case, it shouldn't be a problem. So basically what they're asking, in other words, is why does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov make a distinction between one Jew living there and two Jews living there? Either which way you look at it, it shouldn't make a difference, one or two people. So before, or as part of the answer, we're going to actually start going back to Rabbi Meir and the way we explain Rabbi Meir. We explained a minute ago that Dirat Ovei Kochavim Shma Dira, he views it as a house of dwelling, which is going to forbid everybody living there. And that's why it doesn't matter if there's one Jew or many Jews. So Amaru Abaye is going to question this assumption. Rabbi Meir Dirat Akum Shma Dira. Do we really believe that it's a dira? V'hatanya. Don't we learn? Here it says in the Tosefta. Chatzero shalovei kochavim hareu kedir shel behema. Lo and behold, what does it say? The courtyard of a non-Jew is considered like a pen of an animal, meaning it doesn't forbid. Okay, basically. And we're going to see this later, what they're going to say this means, and then we're going to have to explain it a little bit differently. But what it seems to mean is that, let's say there's no Jews living in the courtyard, and I go to a non-Jew's house, since basically there's no real ownership in a halachic sense because he's not Jewish. So therefore, I can carry items from his house into his courtyard, from his courtyard into his house, because it's not like his place is a place of dwelling, and so is his neighbor, and so is his neighbor, and then they're all forbidden to carry from one to the other. No, there's no such laws by them. Okay, this is kind of saying they're exempt from these laws, and therefore they're not really considered a place of dwelling. So therefore, so here you see, and that's going to be Rabbi Meir's opinion there. Even Rabbi Meir is going to think, because Rabbi Meir appears later in the Tosefta, that that's not considered a place of dwelling, which means we can't even explain Rabbi Meir in that way. So therefore, back to square one. So Ela dekule alma dirat akum lo shma dirat. Maybe we're not at square one because now we already know. They both view it as it's not a living place. Now we're going to have to explain, well then, why does Rabbi Meir forbid it with any Jews living there? And why does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov forbid it only if there's two Jews living there? Well, hacha bigzera shema yilma mimasav. The whole issue, and we're going to have to take a few step process to understand this, is we're worried that you're going to learn from his actions. And therefore, and there's a debate about it, kamifligate. That's what their debate is about. So we'll have to see what their debate is about and what this has to do with anything. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov savar, kevan de'ovei kochavim chashud ashvichut damim. Here comes the big line. Non-Jews are suspect that they're going to kill us. Now, again, this sounds very, in our modern eye, really problematic. But again, you have to remember where they were living and who was talking. And it must be that where they were and the discussion they were having, they really were scared about living among non-Jews. Okay. And now, not in all places, because there were good relations between Jews and non-Jews in some places. But obviously, in certain areas, there was suspicion that they were going to kill the Jews. And therefore, Kevan, okay, and we know that throughout history, there were times when it was very dangerous. And, we learn in the Gemara all the time about all sorts of, because they wrote, they forbade us to do that. They forbade us to do other things. So one can understand in that backdrop, the fear. So now that's step number one. Since they're suspect on shvichut damim, therefore, trei d'shchiche, d'daire, gazru behu, chav lo shchiach lo gazru be'rabbanan. To understand this, you have to know, first of all, when the rabbis institute some sort of gzerah, some sort of ordinance, or don't do this because, they only do it in a regular common case. So therefore, we're going to explain Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Why does he distinguish 2 and 1? Well, since non-Jews are suspect, they want to kill Jews, no Jew would live, or very rare you find it, that there's one Jew in a courtyard with only non-Jews. Because if there's one Jew in the courtyard and only non-Jews, that's the most likely that the non-Jew will kill the Jew, because there's no one else to protect the Jew. Once there's 2 people in the courtyard, 2 Jewish people, then already we're not so worried that the non-Jew is going to kill you, because 2 against 1 or 2 against 2, not clear how many, but the point is we have more strength. Therefore, 2 is a common case, 1 is a less common case, which means that when we make an institution like, or gzerah, an ordinance to say, we don't want you living. Okay, so now let's go farther. So Rabbi Meir Savar, okay, so we're now going to say, that's it. Okay, so let me explain it all. So Rabbi Meir Savar, let's just read on. Zimnin de mikre v'dair. No, sometimes it does happen that one person lives. It's actually more common than you think. And therefore, both of them, okay, Rabbi Meir says we're going to make a gzerah even with one person. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says we're going to make a gzerah even with 2 people. And basically what they're saying is, we want you not to live among non-Jews because you'll learn from their actions. And therefore, we're going to say that you're not going to be able to make an Eruv with the non-Jew, and which obviously you're not going to make an Eruv with them, but they're going to forbid you. Theoretically, their house is not a dirah. You don't even need to make an Eruv. But the rabbi said you're going to be forbidden unless, and now we're going to see what the unless is, this we saw yesterday in Rashi, which was in the previous shiur, which was unless you rent space, you rent their house basically, or some part of their house, which we're going to get to right now. So now we still haven't finished the gzerah all the way. We're going to get to there soon. So Amrei Rabbanan ein eruv mo'il b'mkom akum. That's what I just said. An eruv is not going to work. Ve'ein bitul reshut mo'il b'mkom akum. And the akum can't say, oh, listen, I give you rights to my property, and that's fine. That's not sufficient. That works with a Jew. A Jew who forgot to be part of the eruv is allowed to say, oh yeah, I cancel. You can use my property as you want. Can't do that with a non-Jew. What are you only allowed to do? As we said, ad sheyaskil, okay, until you rent the space from the akum. Now, what's going to happen? Well, okay, so again, they don't want us living among non-Jews, so they make it very difficult for us. They're going to say either in a common case, right, only in 2, or maybe even according to Rabbi Meir, even less than 2 is common. So in both those cases, then, there's even 1, 2, or more, obviously. So now what's going to happen? You have to rent. Now, what's going to be the problem? Akum lo mogal. Well, the akum, the non-Jew, is not going to so likely be so willing to rent you his house. Why? My time. Well, now we have to figure out why. Well, maybe he's worried that you're going to take over his house. If you start renting his house on Shabbat, maybe he's worried you're going to take over. Create chazaka there, say, hey, this is my house, and claim it as your own. Well, it depends on something else. This is a very long-winded argument. We still haven't finished it. So, hani chalaman damar schiyu b'ri'ah b'inan. Well, it depends how you hold in a certain type of argument. If you hold that you need a proper rental agreement, that means schirut b'ri'ah, healthy. It means a proper agreement. Then it makes sense that maybe he'll be worried that you're going to take over his possessions. But if you say that you really don't need a real sale, it's kind of like michirat chametz. We don't really sell him our chametz. It's not a proper. The truth is, I'm not exactly sure how it's done. Maybe there's some proper sale written up, but everybody knows it's not a proper sale. But if it's something without documentation, okay. The truth is, I assume mechirat chametz actually is done with documentation. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I should look it up. But I was never involved in a mechirat chametz documentation arrangement. Anyway, laman damar schiru re'u'a be'inan ma'ika lemema. So if you say you just need some, now we're going to have to figure out what does it mean? Light schirut, okay, weak schirut, weak rental. To Itmar, first of all, it was said, okay, this whole thing is a source of disagreement between Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshet. Rav Chisda amar schirut bria. Rav Sheshet amar schirut re'u'a. Okay, so there's a machlok. So now they say, well, my re'u'a, my bria. Okay, before we get there, let's just understand what is re'u'a, what is bria. In other words, the idea here is, if it's schirut bria, we understand why the non-Jew is not going to be willing. But what if it's schirut re'u'a? Why wouldn't he be willing? So first we have to understand what is schirut bria, what is schirut re'u'a, to understand what he'd be willing or not willing to do. So my re'u'a, my bria. Ilema bria bepruta, re'u'a pachot mishav pruta. Maybe bria is with a pruta. That's something of value, right? The value of a coin. Re'u'a is less than a value. Now in Jewish law, you have to have any kind of sale. Anything has to be done with a pruta. If it's done with something less than the value of a pruta, it's not a valid sale. So maybe you'd say that's the difference. And then it's not a real sale. You use something that's worth much less than a pruta. Well, mi kalamanda amar me'akum b'pachot mishav pruta lo. Does anyone really say that it's not a sale if you do a sale with a non-Jew less than a shava pruta? In other words, that's all within the realm of Jewish law. When it comes to non-Jewish law, and this, by the way, supports the premise that maybe shiurim, anytime we have a requisite amount, is only for Jews and it doesn't apply to non-Jews. So if you say the bria is pruta, is b'chol mishav pruta, mi kalaman damar akum b'chol mishav pruta lo. Is there anybody who says that? Shalach Rabbi Yitzchak Rabbi Yaakov bar Giori, Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, the following Rabbi Yitzchak, son of Rabbi Yaakov bar Giori, sent a question. Sent Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. He sent to us in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Havu yodim shesochrim min ha'akum afilu p'chot mishav pruta. You can rent from an akum less than a shava pruta value. In other words, that's a valid amount. And additionally, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ben Noach neherag pachot mishav pruta. If a Ben Noach does something, goes against one of the Noachide laws, the B'nai, the 7 mitzvot, the 7 laws that non-Jews are supposed to keep. If he goes against any of those laws, and one of them is not to steal, he gets the death penalty. And here you see he gets the death penalty even if he steals something less than a shava pruta. And then he actually doesn't need to return it because this is a classic law, different ways of reading why, but some people say it's a classic law of what we call kim lebe de rabamine. Because he has a severe punishment of death, he doesn't have to pay back the financial. And also he can't pay back the financial. There's no, in Jewish law, if you steal, you actually don't get lashes. You don't get death penalty at all. It's not something worthy of death penalty, but you also don't even get lashes because it's something called a lavani takla say. It says, if you steal, right, but you return what you stole. That's a way of fixing it. So if you can fix it that way, you actually don't get lashes and then you return it. Since the non-Jew doesn't have the option to return it, he's not commanded to return it. Therefore, he doesn't have the opportunity to do it that way and he will get a penalty. And in his case, the penalty is death. But what do you see here? Even less than the value of a pruta, he gets punished. So, Ella, if that can't be bri'ah and re'uah, pruta less than a pruta. Ella bri'ah b'mohar keva aborgane. Okay, 2 different interpretations I'll bring. One is that it's chairs and tables. It means I want to have rights to put chairs and tables in your property. And the other is that it's an appropriate document that's with authorities, signatures, a real serious document. Okay, so either that's what it is or that. And re'uah is below mohar keva aborgane. And right, so re'uah is either I don't have, it's a rental agreement, but I don't really have any rights to do anything in your property, or it's not done with any documentation, and therefore he's not worried. If you have no documents, how are you going to claim rights to his possessions? So that's why. So now, back to the beginning of this section. So then I understand the non-Jew doesn't want to do this arrangement with you. So the whole thing is the rabbis instituted that, right? What's the idea? They don't want us to live among non-Jews because they don't want us to learn from their actions. So what do they say? You can't make an Eruv with them. And the only way you can carry, in other words, you really don't have to make an Eruv, but the law is that they're going to now forbid you, the rabbis instituted, so that unless you rent, and renting, okay, so if you hold you need a serious rental contract, there's no way they're going to do that, which means that you're basically not going to be able to carry outside your house on Shabbat because you have this non-Jew living there, and therefore you're going to basically go by in an area where there's no non-Jews, and that will prevent you from living with a non-Jew and consorting with him and learning from his bad actions. But again, this is in the world where non-Jews were involved in, right? We talked about it once before, how the Romans were steeped in serious, bad behaviors, doing orgies and all sorts of things that are forbidden by Torah law and inappropriate really by most people's books. And therefore, the idea was, these were the people that they were consorting with. These were the non-Jews. Those people, you can understand why they didn't want to be anywhere near them. Plus, they wanted to kill Jews in addition. So that was also a problem. So that makes sense if you say that that's the issue. But if it's just some sort of, either you can't use even chairs and tables, you move it to their property, or you don't do it with any sort of documentation, then then there's why wouldn't the non-Jew agree to it? So they say, this is a fascinating line. The non-Jew is concerned about witchcraft, and therefore he's not going to be willing to even rent you in this kind of way. What does it mean he's concerned about witchcraft? So one option is to say, well, if you're doing some sort of rental agreement with this non-Jew, and you're doing it, and you say, listen, I want to do this rental agreement. It's not really an agreement. It's just, it allows me to carry. They're going to think, this guy's crazy, and what's he talking about, right? What on earth do you mean? And he's going to be concerned that maybe you're trying to do some sort of witchcraft on him and getting him to do something so that he can do witchcraft. Some people say actually the concern is that if you have in order to do witchcraft, you needed to have some sort of ownership over one's possessions to be able to put a spell on them. And that maybe that's why there's a concern that you might be putting a spell on his items, on his house, on his possessions, or on him, whatever it might be, or her. So therefore, they wouldn't want to engage in an agreement with you, even if it was schirut ru'ah, a very light agreement. So that was all very long-winded to explain what the machloket Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Meir is, why one or two, right? Why one, only one, even one, or two, because is it common or not common? And then the issue is, it's all a deterrent to get the Jews not to be living among non-Jews because they didn't want them to learn from their actions. Okay, moving on. Still in the same topic, Gufa. Now we're going to go back to this line we saw before. So the courtyard of a non-Jew is like a deer of a behemah, like a pen of an animal. Now here we're going to read the rest of the Tosefta. Therefore, one can carry, if I go into the non-Jew's house, I can carry items from their house into their courtyard and back, anywhere I want, because it's not considered a place of dwelling, really, and nothing's forbidden. I told you Rabbi Meir would appear here. However, if there's one Jew there, then living in that courtyard, then he will forbid it. Because then he becomes the Jew, owns the courtyard, and then we can't take items, another Jew can't take items from the non-Jews and bring them out into the courtyard, because what will happen, he'll end up carrying into my courtyard, and he can't do that because I'm here. The Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov again, he says it's the two. Here's the machlok of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that we saw before. So now we're going to go into this and understand this first line a little better. Amar, we're actually going to ask a question. So a courtyard of a non-Jew is like a pen of an animal, which they're going to assume means that you can carry from the items, right, of the non-Jew's house into the courtyard. So even if I'm a Jew and I come in, I can do that. But doesn't it say, if you're living with an akum in a courtyard, what did our Mishnah say? You forbid him from carrying. Okay, so Rashi says here, Hareu kedir shel behema, nochri lo asar midi. The nochri, it's not forbidden at all. V'chi dayar Yisrael gabe ka'amar Rabbi Meir, di Yisrael oser al beito shel akum, aval akum eino oser al beito shel Yisrael. They're going to assume that what this means, okay, Rashi is basically saying that if you live in the, that if, if you, right, the akum forbids doesn't forbid the people who come into his house at all, okay? Even if he's living with another Jew in the courtyard. In other words, the Israel becomes forbidden. One second, the Israel forbids l'taltel mi beit ha'akum l'chatzer. One second, the Israel forbids carrying from the non-Jew's house to the courtyard. In other words, what happens is, the idea being here, the akum doesn't forbid, if the akum's house is not considered a house, then theoretically what it means is that if I come and I just go into the akum's house, I now, if there's a Jew living there, I can't carry from the non-Jew's house into the courtyard because there's a Jew there, and that Jew forbids me. That's what we assume Rabbi Meir means. When Rabbi Meir says, as soon as there's a Jew there, osel, it means the Jew that lives there forbids anyone now from carrying from the non-Jew's house into the courtyard because this courtyard now has a Jew living there. That forbids anyone like that. But it doesn't sound like anyone's forbidden. The Jew himself should theoretically, if we look at it as a dir of a be'emah, the non-Jew's house, the Jew is really the only owner of the courtyard. So the Jew should be able to carry from the Jew's house out. It's just a problem from the non-Jew's house, but from the Jew's house should be allowed to carry in this courtyard. So what do they answer? Lo kasha, hadite, hadalete. This source, which was the Tosefta, is talking about something different. It's talking about if the non-Jew wasn't there for Shabbat, he left entirely. If he's gone entirely, then yes, the Jew can carry outside the Jew's house if he wants, no problem. But if the non-Jew is there, hadiite, that's the Mishnah. If the non-Jew is there, then the Jew can't carry in the courtyard either if the non-Jew is there. Okay, so basically we're going to say like this. It splits into, it's true that akum's house is like a dir shel behema. However, if the non-Jew is there in existence, he's there physically on Shabbat, then I can't carry from my house out. But if he's not there on Shabbat, then it's my courtyard entirely because his house doesn't count as a house. Okay, whereas if it's a Jew, it's going to be a problem even if the Jew leaves for Shabbat because his house is his house and he's the owner of it. Okay, so now we're gonna see more. Umay kasavar. Wait a minute. What does he hold? I kasavar dira below ba'alim shma dira. If you're gonna say a house without owners is considered a house, then afilu akum nami nitzar. In other words, now we have to go into how do we view, in general in law, a house without someone being there. So if you say a dira below ba'alim is a house, then afilu akum nami nitzar. Then even the akum's house should be forbidden. And ikasavar dira below ba'alim lo shma dira. And if you think a house without owners is not a dira, afilu Yisrael nami lo nitzar. Basically, what we're saying is either view a house without owners like a house, or you view it not like a house, but then it shouldn't make a difference if it's owned by Jews or owned by non-Jews. And so what do they answer? Lo olam kasavar dira below ba'alim lo shma dira. Really, if the owner's not there, we don't view it as a house. Okay, we view it as not anyone's house. So now we're going to left to understand if a Jew's there. Yisrael d'chiite asal. So if a Jew's there, then obviously he forbids it if he doesn't join the Eruv. Ki lete, but if he's not there, well, gazru be'rabbanan. It's not really forbidden by the letter of the law, but the rabbis decreed that it's going to be forbidden anyway, because they don't want to end up with a situation where a Jew is in the courtyard and doesn't join the Eruv. So they basically say, even if the Jew is not there, we're going to assume, we're still going to view it as if they're there, but it's only gzera, it's not really from the law. And akum, if he's dechiite gzera shema yoma mima'asav, and therefore ki'ite asal ki leite lo asar. The whole issue with an akum, though, is that he doesn't really forbid me from carrying. It's only that we decree that he does. Once we decree that he does, well, when he's not there, we're not going to make this decree. First of all, the whole decree is maybe you'll learn from his actions. If he's not there, there's no way you're going to learn from his actions. And also, the whole issue is gzerah to begin with. So we're not going to add another gzerah with the Jew. It's forbidden by the law if the Jew's there. So when he's not there, we're going to make a gzerah about it. But the non-Jew, when he's there, it's only a gzerah de Rabbanan. So of course, we're not going to then add another gzerah when he's not there. Okay. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. When he's not there, it's not forbidden. It says in the Mishnah. If you leave your house and you go and you're Konesh Shvita in a different city, whether it's a non-Jew or whether it's a Jew, they still forbid everybody. So what do you see here? Even when they left, it's still a problem. They still forbid everybody else in the courtyard. So the answer is Hatav da'ate b'yomi. No, that's a different kind of leaving. That's when they left and they were Konesh Shvita somewhere else, but they were planning to come back on Shabbat. At the beginning of Shabbat, they were somewhere else, but they were planning to return on Shabbat. Okay, and then that's not an issue. Then it is an issue specifically, but that's not an issue for us because we weren't talking about that scenario. We were talking about the scenario where they were gone for all of Shabbat. Okay, now we want to know, the end of the daf is very straightforward or simple at least. We want to know who we hold like. Is it one, as long as there's one Jew in the courtyard, it's a problem if there's a non-Jew, or does it have to be two Jews for it to be a problem? So, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Halacha Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. Okay, we hold like Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov that it's only when there's two people living in the courtyard and not one. If there's one Jew living in a courtyard by himself with a non-Jew, doesn't need to start renting the property. He can carry freely in the Chatzir. So we're lenient again in Eruvin as we've seen before. Rav Huna Amar Minhag. Rav Huna says, listen, this is the custom. Okay, we don't tell people, but if they ask us, then we can tell them yes. But we don't go around teaching everybody this halacha. Minhag Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Nahagu Am Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. Well, it's not that we hold this way, but people generally customarily did this, and the rabbis didn't stop them. Okay, but it's not that the rabbis decided this should be the halacha from the beginning. It's just an interesting way of seeing different ways of coming to a halacha conclusion. Amalei Abai le Rav Yosef. Kaimalan. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, excuse me, Kaimalan. We learned that, or we have a tradition that Mishnat Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov kav v'naki. It's small, okay, it's a small opinion. That means you can measure it in a kav. Doesn't really mean you can measure it in a kav, but he doesn't say a lot, but it's very clean. Okay, it's very solid. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel halachak Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. And okay, so Abai says Rav Yosef, he's got the best opinion in general. And Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, we paskin like Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. And then we want to know, is this such an obvious thing that ma'ulo ruya b'mkom rabo? If your rabbi's in town, you're not allowed to basically teach halacha with your rabbi there. You have to let your rabbi be the one to paskin the halacha. But what does it mean? And this is a great question in general. What does it mean to paskin halacha? Right? People like to say, oh, maybe women shouldn't paskin halacha. And what does it mean women shouldn't paskin halacha? What does it mean to paskin halacha? Does it mean somebody asks, oh, listen, I cooked something this way and that way, and I put that in and fell in, and I put it in the wrong? Is that right? And it's something pretty obvious. Is that a psak halacha? Generally, we'd say, anyone can answer that question. And when people talk about psikat halacha, now, whether there's an issue of women paskening halacha or not, I'm putting that aside. That's a whole separate question. Is there really an issue with a woman paskening halacha? But assuming a woman were knowledgeable and had all the information and had learned for many years and knew how to pasken, and right, which definitely is possible nowadays, amazing, changes that have happened, assuming that that's possible. So there's a debate, is it srara? Is it an issue? Again, I don't want to get into all the issues, but let's assume that theoretically, maybe even if you say it's a problem, or maybe you'd say there's a woman who doesn't know enough to get to that stage. But there's psikat halacha of all different levels. There's things that you can easily learn and know the answer to. Once you know the answer, you can tell someone the answer. That's not even, right? So what comes under psak halacha? So they want to know, is this the kind of thing that's considered something that you shouldn't say in front when your rabbi is in the neighborhood or in the area? You should let your rabbi answer the question. So can you do that? Amar le. So let's say, can you say the halacha is like Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov in this case? Is that something you could say even if your rabbi's there, or does your rabbi have to be the one to say it? This is all a matter of respect also for the elders and the rabbis. So Amar le afilu be'ata bekutcha ba'u minei Rav Chisda kol shnei de Rav Huna. All the time that Rav Huna was alive, Rav Chisda would always ask Rav Huna, even about an egg in kutach. Kutach is a dairy. It's a sour yogurt, sour milk, mixed like a yogurty kind of thing, mixed with salt and bread. And if you put an egg in there, now what's the question with an egg? There's not even really a question. The question is, since an egg comes from a bird, is that considered meat? And then you can't have it with a kutach. Okay, nobody thinks eggs are meat. Like, that's a pretty obvious question. Even that he wouldn't answer in front of his rabbi. Velo ore, okay, and he wouldn't teach it. Amarle Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba Abaye, Kigo Megillat Ta'ani Tichtiva Umancha Ma'ulo Ruya Ba'atre Derabe. Something written in Megillat Ta'ani. That was a book that had a list of all sorts of days where unique things happen historically and something special, a miracle happened. And because of that, or it was a special day for some reason, some event happened, and you're not allowed to fast, you're not allowed to have eulogies and things like that. There was a book that existed then. It was one of the few books that existed. And because of that, they talk about something that's written and it's so clear. Okay, most things weren't written in their day. So could you teach that? So they say, Amarle, Hachi Amar Yosef, Afilu Be'at Habakutcha Ba Minei Rav Chisda Kol Shnei Rav Huna. He answers in the exact same question, right below Ore, and he would never teach that when his rabbi was around. Rav Chisda Ore Bekafre B'Shnei Rav Huna. And now they just tell us, by the way, he did teach in a different city, in Kafre. He just wouldn't teach in the city of Rav Huna, but he did teach in a different city, which makes sense because then Rav Chisda wasn't there, and then who's going to answer the question? I'm sorry, Rav Huna wasn't there. Who's going to answer the question? Then you can answer the question. So this is an interesting way to end the daf in terms of questions regarding psikat halacha in front. This isn't. I kind of raised the issue of women paskin halacha in general. That's not what we're talking about. It's not an issue. Can you paskin halacha? It's an issue. Can you teach it if your rabbi is around, and you should let your rabbi teach it out of respect. I was raising the issue with women in terms of just what do we define as a psak halacha, right? And here they're saying anything for this purpose, okay? Not necessarily for the women of women paskining, but for this purpose of not of respect for your elders would be an issue. Any type of psak halacha. If your rabbi's there, your rabbi should answer the question and not you. It's interesting, right? We don't have that kind of level of respect these days as much as they did. It's very interesting to see the idea that you shouldn't even answer a simple question. If your rabbi's there, it should all go to him. Nowadays, people would say, oh no, leave the hard questions. I mean, even then, think about Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And all the Sarei Alafim and Sarei Me'ot, leave the smaller questions for the other people, leave the bigger questions for the bigger rabbis. So this sugya kind of says otherwise. Anyway, it's something to think about. So Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov. And we'll pick up on Sunday morning at the continuation of this sugya. And we're going to see some more things about teaching halacha in front of your rabbi.